Welcome to Hollywood Graveyard, where we set out to remember and celebrate the lives of those who lived to entertain us by visiting their final resting places. Today we continue our tour of New York City, where we'll find such stars as Mae West, Harry Houdini, Louis Armstrong, and many more. Join us, won't you? In our previous video, we kicked off our tour of New York City. Today we continue our tour, picking up not far from where we left off, and making our way across Brooklyn and Queens. If you haven't done so already, be sure to check out Part 1. In 1847, New York passed the Rural Cemetery Act, which allowed for the development of commercial cemeteries outside Manhattan. Until that time, the dead, for the most part, had to be buried in either a churchyard or on private land. The result of the new Rural Cemetery Act was that in the mid-1800s, large parcels of land bordering Brooklyn and Queens were developed as rural cemeteries. Dozens of them, many clustered together, making essentially a massive borough of cemeteries. In Brooklyn and Queens, the dead outnumber the living. We'll begin our tour on the eastern edge of Brooklyn at the Evergreen Cemetery, the westernmost in the largest concentration of cemeteries spanning Brooklyn and Queens. Evergreens was founded in 1849, just after the passage of New York's Rural Cemetery Act, and for a time it was New York's busiest cemetery, hosting now some 500,000 souls. Not far in from the entrance, we take the first left and find Lawn Section on the right. Here we find the grave of animation and cartoon pioneer, Winsor McCay. He is considered America's first great cartoon film animator, long before the days of Disney and Fleischer. He gained renown with his 1905 comic strip Little Nemo in Slumberland, an innovative and visually stunning comic which followed the adventures of a boy named Nemo through his dreams. By 1911, he had branched out into animation, creating an animated short film with his Little Nemo characters, one of the earliest cartoons ever produced. He began using these cartoons in his vaudeville act. His best known and most significant cartoon was Gertie the Dinosaur, produced in 1914. Gertie was introduced in his vaudeville act as a tame, trained dinosaur, with which McCay would interact. This film was innovative in that it was the first to use detailed backgrounds separate from foreground characters, as well as animation techniques like keyframing, in-betweening, registration marks, and animation loops. This little film would influence generations of animators to follow. Let's cross Evergreens to the far east side. At the intersection where Redemption Section begins, we find legendary dancer Bill Bojangles Robinson, one of vaudeville's highest paid and best known performers. It wasn't long until he branched out into every major form of entertainment, from Broadway, records, radio, film, and television. He was considered the greatest tap dancer of his era, known for his stair dance routine. Here he is performing that routine with Shirley Temple. Robinson used his fame to overcome racial barriers of the era, from being one of vaudeville's first black solo performers, to headlining Broadway and appearing in the first interracial dance team on screen with Shirley Temple. The 1943 musical film Stormy Weather was based on his life and featured many other top African-American performers of his day, including Lena Horne, Cab Calloway, and Dooley Wilson. National Tap Dance Day is May 25th, Bojangles' birthday. If we cross Cypress Avenue to the northeast, we reach the next cemetery in this cluster, Union Field Cemetery, a Jewish cemetery founded in 1878. Following this pathway a short ways, we find the grave of Bert Lahr on the right. He was a comedic actor who worked his way through burlesque, vaudeville, and Broadway. He's best remembered today for his role as the Cowardly Lion in The Wizard of Oz.
Why don't you come along with us? We're on our way to see the wizard now, to get him a heart.
And him a brain.
I'm sure he could give you some courage.
Well, wouldn't you feel degraded to be seen in the company of a cowardly lion?
I won.
On Broadway, Lahr won a Tony Award for his role in Roxy in 1964. He died in 1967 while filming The Night They Raided Minsky's. If we continue east through Union Field, we'll pass into Bethel Cemetery. These are some of those magnificent old cemeteries you'd best get out of your car and walk through. Try and get lost. After all, that's the best way to get somewhere you've never been. Here at Bethel Cemetery, just northwest of the roundabout, is the Goodman family mausoleum. This is where legendary actor Edward G. Robinson is entombed. Robinson epitomized the tough guy gangster of Hollywood's golden age. He shot to stardom for his acclaimed performance as the sneering, psychotic Rico Bandello in 1931's Little Caesar.
Arnie, you're through. You hire these mugs, they missed, now you're through. If you ain't out of town by tomorrow morning, you won't never leave it except in a pine box. I'm taking over this territory. From now on, it's mine.
Other notable roles include Johnny Rocco in Key Largo, Barton Keyes in Double Indemnity, and Dathan in The Ten Commandments. He died just weeks after finishing Soylent Green, and has since been ranked among the greatest male stars of classic cinema. Let's continue to enjoy this magnificent old necropolis as we turn south to Machpelah Cemetery. Not far from the entrance and the road is the grave of one of the most legendary magicians in history, Harry Houdini. He was born Eric Weiss in Budapest, his family arriving in the States when he was a child. He began performing magic as a teenager in New York, which is when he changed his name to Houdini after French magician Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin. He performed in dime museums and sideshows, initially with card tricks, but soon began experimenting with escape acts. He rose to fame with his handcuff escape acts and found himself performing in the biggest vaudeville houses in the country. The escape acts he performed soon expanded to straitjackets, coffins, chains, prisons, and more, becoming ever more spectacular. He was also known for his submersion feats, like the milk can escape and the Chinese water torture cell. In the 1920s, he appeared in several films which showcased his magic, but live performance was always his bread and butter. The seal on his tomb is the Society of American Magicians, for which he served as president from 1917 until 1926. Every year, the society holds a broken wand ceremony here at his grave. In later years, Houdini shifted his efforts towards studying and debunking spiritualism, mystics, and psychics, an effort carried on today by other magicians, such as James Randi and Penn and Teller, to unmuddy the waters between skilled illusion for the sake of entertainment and fraud. So in this vein, before his death, Houdini agreed with his wife, Bess, that after his death, if he could find a way to communicate with her, he would send her the secret message, Rosabelle Believe. Harry Houdini died on Halloween in 1926 at the age of 52. Days earlier, he had been struck in the gut by a man testing his strength. Houdini wasn't prepared for the blows and performed thereafter in great pain. He refused medical treatment, and days later his appendix ruptured, and he died of peritonitis. His wife Bess held a seance annually for 10 years after his death, but never heard the secret code from Houdini from the other side. The tradition of holding a seance for Houdini continues, held by magicians around the world on Halloween. Bess was not only his wife, but also a performer and his stage assistant. She isn't actually buried here, though. She's at Gate of Heaven, further north. Sadly, her family, who was Roman Catholic, would not allow her to be buried here in a Jewish cemetery with her husband. Continuing east across Cypress Hill Street, We reach the last but oldest in this cluster of cemeteries, Cypress Hills. It's about the same size as the Evergreens, but was founded 1 year earlier in 1848, making it the first non-denominational rural cemetery in the boroughs of Brooklyn and Queens. On the grounds are 2 mausoleums, including the grandiose Cypress Hills Abbey, completed in 1931. This is where we'll begin our tour. But the doors appear to be locked. Maybe if we ring the doorbell. And we're in. The only living souls in this entire building. Let's make our way up to the 2nd floor, then left, and head all the way to the end of the corridor, then right. Near the end on the left is the crypt of comedic actor Victor Moore. He made his screen debut in 1915 and was a major Broadway star in the 20s and 30s, including in the Gershwins of Thee I Sing. Some of his notable film roles include Swing Time alongside Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and It Happened on Fifth Avenue. His final role was as the plumber in The 7-Year Itch in 1955. Back the way we came, let's pass the stairway to the south side. On the right we find the West family plot. Way up at the top is the queen of innuendo, Mae West. She was an actress, writer, and comedian whose career entertaining audiences spanned 7 decades. She began performing at the age of 7, and by her teens was a professional on the vaudeville circuit. As a young woman, Mae wore her sexuality on her sleeve, and began writing her own risque plays, including the 1926 play entitled Sex. The play was a success, but it scandalized many viewers and locals for its immorality. Mae was even arrested on an obscenity charge and sentenced to 10 days in a workhouse. The scandal only increased her popularity. Other plays include The Drag in 1927, which dealt with homosexuality, and Diamond Lil in 1928, a Broadway hit. Hollywood soon came calling, launching her film career at close to 40. She was a box office hit in the early 1930s in films like She Done Him Wrong and I'm No Angel. As her film career took off, film censors from the production code were in full force. She continually pushed the limits of censorship with her tawdry one-liners and dodged censors with naughty double entendres.
Well, when I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
I see a man in your life.
What, only one?
Aren't you forgetting that you're married?
I'm doing my best.
You certainly know the way to a man's heart.
Funny, too, because I don't know how to cook.
I'll never forget you.
No one ever does.
You were wonderful tonight.
I'm always wonderful at night. I should come up sometime, see me.
By the mid-1930s, she was the highest paid woman in America. But the censors began to crack down, so she left film and returned to stage for a time. When censorship began to end in the 60s, she returned to film, like in Myra Breckenridge. After her death at age 87, a service was held at Forest Lawn in Hollywood, before being entombed here in New York with her family. She's considered today one of the greatest female stars of classic cinema. That's all we'll find here in the Abbey. Let's turn out the lights, lock the doors behind us, and head back out into the rain. We now sojourn south, pass under Jackie Robinson Parkway, which splits the cemetery, to find the grave of its namesake. In section 6, next to the road, we find legendary number 42, Jackie Robinson. He was a professional baseball player who broke the color barrier in 1947, becoming the first African American to play in the major leagues since it was segregated in the 1880s. He played 1 season in the Negro Leagues before being signed by the Brooklyn Dodgers. By the end of his first season, he was awarded Rookie of the Year, and in the years to come, he'd be a 6-time All-Star and MVP in 1949, the first black player to win the honor. Donning the Dodgers uniform and playing in America's favorite sport, Robinson was a powerful and courageous symbol of equality in an age when racial segregation still prevailed in this country. His influence helped spark the civil rights movement in the decades that followed. Robinson retired in 1956 and was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1962. And in 1997, MLB retired his number 42 across all major league teams. He died of a heart attack in 1972 at the age of 53. In 2013, the film 42 was released, chronicling the life of Jackie Robinson. We've reached the end of this massive cluster of cemeteries, so let's leave the entertainment world for a short time and enter the criminal underworld to find a few individuals who are more notorious than famous. North of Cypress Hills a few miles is St. John's Cemetery, a Catholic cemetery where a large number of organized crime figures are laid to rest. St. John's Cemetery was consecrated in 1881 and now covers 190 acres here in the Middle Village area. In Section 3, near the intersection, south of the St. John Cloister, is the Lucania family mausoleum, where the notorious Lucky Luciano is entombed. He was born Salvatore Lucania in Sicily, and his family immigrated to New York when he was a child. He soon embarked on a budding career in crime. As a teen, he befriended Jewish mobsters Meyer Lansky and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. Lucky worked for one of the prominent bosses of the era, Joe the Boss Masseria. But Masseria and rival boss Maranzano, who were known as Mustache Pete's, were old school in their approach to organized crime, refusing to branch out and do business with Jewish or Irish gangs. During the Castellamarese War in the early 30s, which pitted Masseria and Maranzano against each other, Lucky led and orchestrated the efforts to remove both of them, with the vision of a national crime syndicate. Masseria was murdered, ending the war, and then Maranzano was murdered, ending the era of the old world Mustache Pete's and ushering in an era of modern organized crime, with Lucky Luciano as the prominent crime boss. He's therefore known as the father of modern organized crime in America. He then formed the Commission, the governing body for organized crime, composed of representatives of 5 families, one led by him, the Luciano family, which later became the Genovese family. In 1936, Lucky was sent to prison for his crimes for 30 to 60 years. However, during World War II, he offered to help in the war effort, to use his criminal connections to aid the Allies' causes against Italy, in exchange for a commuted sentence. The offer was accepted, and after the war he was released from prison, but deported back to Italy. He died of a heart attack at the Naples airport in 1962, where he had gone to meet with a producer to discuss a film about his life. In Section 11, near the Resurrection Mausoleum, we find the man who took over the Luciano family, Don Vito Genovese. He was an Italian-American mobster who rose to power during Prohibition. Along with Lucky, Genovese was part of the Castellamarese War and was one of the men responsible for the assassination of Masseria. In 1957, he took over the Luciano family, which then became known as the Genovese family. He was known as the boss of all bosses in that era, leading what was, and remains to this day, one of the most wealthy, powerful, and dangerous crime organizations in the world. In 1959, he was convicted of smuggling and distributing narcotics, and was sentenced to federal prison for 15 years. He would continue to run the family and order hits from behind prison walls, where he finally died of a heart attack in 1969. Let's make our way over to the magnificent St. John Cloister. This mausoleum is unlike any we've seen before, with many crypt faces actually covered in wood rather than marble, perhaps symbolic of Jesus the carpenter or the craftsmanship of old world monasteries and chapels. Let's head up to the 5th floor, leaving the carpet and wood and entering the familiar marble and concrete into Section 2. Here we find Carlo Gambino. After the formation of the Commission in 1931, he belonged to the family formed by Vincent Mangano. Power struggles within the family led to a succession of bosses, usually by murder, and in 1957, Gambino assumed command of the family, which then bore his name. Don Carlo's preferred rackets included extorting labor unions, gambling, loan sharking, etc., but he forbade narcotics trafficking. He led the family 20 years until his death. Unlike many of his contemporaries who were either murdered or died in prison, Gambino died at home of natural causes at the age of 74. He was one of the inspirations for the Vito Corleone character in The Godfather.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
Heading down to the 3rd floor, we find one of the men who succeeded Gambino. Here we find John Gotti, who became head of the Gambino family in the 1980s. Unlike other mob bosses, Gotti didn't shy away from the limelight and kept a genial public appearance, despite being one of the most dangerous and powerful mob bosses in the country. He was known as the Teflon Don for his ability to avoid prosecution. That is, until his own underboss, Sammy the Bull, turned against him and helped the FBI bring various charges against Gotti, including murder, racketeering, and tax evasion. He was sentenced to life in prison where he died of cancer in 2002. After his death, his descendants were featured in a reality TV show, Growing Up Gotti. That's all we'll find today at St. John's. Heading northwest now, several miles, in the Woodside area of Queens, is Calvary Cemetery. First Calvary Cemetery is where Don Corleone's funeral took place in The Godfather. Today we'll visit the new Calvary Cemetery just next to it to the east, and re-enter the entertainment world. Calvary Cemetery, a Catholic cemetery, was consecrated in 1848, making it one of the oldest cemeteries in the country. Over the years, additional divisions were added, and there are now 4, spanning some 365 acres. It's the largest cemetery in the United States, not by acreage, but by the number of interments, somewhere around 3 million. In 2nd Calvary, Section 42, adjacent to the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, is the grave of funny man Dom DeLuise. His early roles were in television, seen in appearances on shows like Tinker's Workshop and The Munsters. He was good friends with Mel Brooks, becoming a regular in Brooks's films, like Blazing Saddles, Silent Movie, and History of the World Part 1. Dom was also good friends with Burt Reynolds, and they appeared together in several films, including Cannonball Run and Smokey and the Bandit 2. Fans of animation and Don Bluth films will also recognize his voice, as a number of lovable characters from Itchy and All Dogs Go to Heaven to Jeremy in The Secret of Nim.
Hey, there's a cat out there.
Does he see you?
No. Yes.
Stand perfectly still.
Everything's fine. He's headed right for us.
Don't panic. Fast or slow?
Medium. Make that fast. Very fast. I have to go now. Excuse me.
In addition to acting and comedy, Dom was quite renowned as a chef. He died in 2009 at the age of 75. From here we travel east several miles to Flushing Cemetery, where the cool autumn rains have returned. This is a non-denominational cemetery founded in 1853 and covering around 75 acres. In Section 6, in the north end of the cemetery, we find one of the great music legends of the last century, Louis Armstrong, a stone trumpet adorning the top of his tombstone. Born into poverty in New Orleans, young Louis performed on the streets as a child for change. He rose to prominence in the 20s as a jazz trumpeter and cornet player. He was innovative in that he shifted the focus of jazz music to the solo performer, and not just group improvisation. In 1925, he formed his own band, Louis Armstrong and his Hot Five, recording some of his early hits, like Potato Head Blues. His nickname, Satchmo, was a shortening of another nickname he had acquired as a child, Satchel Mouth, though the accounts of how he acquired this nickname vary. Louis Armstrong would become as well known for his distinctive gravel singing voice and scat singing as for his trumpet playing. And by the 50s, he had become a beloved American icon and jazz ambassador. Many of his biggest hits came later in life, like Mac the Knife, Hello Dolly, and What a Wonderful World.
And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Our last cemetery of the day is just beyond the eastern limits of Queens, in Elmont, Beth David Cemetery. This is a large Jewish cemetery founded in 1917. South of the entrance, in Section 4, off of Lincoln Avenue, we find Dr. Joyce Brothers. She was a psychologist, perhaps best remembered for her daily advice column that ran in various newspapers from 1960 to 2013. And in the 1950s, she was given her own TV show, where she dispensed relationship advice, becoming a pioneer in the field. She appeared in a number of film and TV roles, often as herself or as a self-parody. She was also the only woman to win the top prize on the $64,000 question game show. Dr. Joyce would influence other radio and TV doctors, including Dr. Laura and Dr. Phil. Let's double back to the northern end of the cemetery, to section BB2. East along this path, several rows, then left, we find legendary film composer Bernard Herrmann. He was one of the most innovative and unconventional composers of Hollywood's golden age, perhaps best known for his scores with Alfred Hitchcock, including Vertigo and Psycho. He's the man behind the shrieking strings in Psycho, the low woodwinds in Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, the saxophone in Taxi Driver, and the Twisted Nerve whistle. Herrmann could hold you in suspense, unnerve you, and terrify you with his music, but at the same time, move you to tears with his stirring string writing, something no one did better, like Scene d'Amour in Vertigo. He was also an early experimenter of unconventional sounds in film scores, like the theremin in The Day the Earth Stood Still. He was nominated for 5 Oscars, winning for All That Money Can Buy. His work for television includes music for The Twilight Zone, including the first season's opening theme. He died just hours after finishing recording the score for Taxi Driver. South a handful of sections, we reach Section A. South of the road, nearly hidden, is the grave of Abe Vigoda. He was an actor who had a number of notable and memorable roles throughout his career. He played Salvatore Tessio in The Godfather.
Barzini wants to arrange a meeting. He says we can straighten any of our problems out.
You talked to him?
Yeah. I can arrange security. On my territory. All right.
Right.
All right.
In the 70s and 80s, he played Phil Fish on the popular sitcom Barney Miller, a role which earned him 3 Emmy nominations. Beginning in the 80s, Abe Vigoda was the subject of a number of celebrity death hoaxes, being mistakenly reported as having died, first in 1982, then again in 1987. This led to a running gag Vigoda would play along with about whether or not he was still alive. In the end, he lived and performed into his 90s. Continuing south to the second to last section, Section 1-4, we find the Kaufman family plot near the southwest corner. Here is actor and comedic performer Andy Kaufman. His brand of comedy wasn't telling jokes, but rather performance art that borders on the absurd and irrational. He was one of the inaugural performers on Saturday Night Live when it debuted in 1975.
I think we should turn off the TV. I don't know if you are laughing at me or with me.
He often performed as an unnamed foreign man, which eventually evolved into the Latka Gravis character on the 70s and 80s sitcom Taxi. Other memorable characters include lounge singer Tony Clifton. At the young age of 35, Kaufman, a non-smoker, was diagnosed with a rare form of lung cancer, which took his life in 1984. Before his death, Kaufman had often spoken of faking his own death as a grand hoax. So for years after he died, many people believed he was still alive, preparing for a return. Sadly, such was not the case. As a tribute to Andy Kaufman, the band REM wrote the song Man on the Moon.
Andy, are you goofing on Elvis too, baby? Are we losing touch?
Man on the Moon would also be the title of the film about his life, starring Jim Carrey. If you have a car, now is definitely the time to get back in it, It's a long way to our last stop in the far southeast corner of the cemetery, section H9. Next to the road is the Landau family plot, where we find Martin Landau. He worked as a cartoonist before breaking into acting in the 50s, in films like Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest. On television, he made appearances on shows like The Untouchables, The Outer Limits, and The Twilight Zone, and was a series regular on the original Mission Impossible TV series, as Master of Disguise, Role in Hand. The role made him a star, and earned him 3 Emmy nominations. In the late 80s, he starred in a series of Oscar-nominated roles, culminating with the 1990 Tim Burton film, Ed Wood, in which he played Bela Lugosi. The role won him the Oscar.
Children! I love children!
Aren't you scared, little boy? I'm going to drink your blood.
You're not a real vampire. Those teeth don't frighten me.
Landau was also an acting coach who mentored greats such as Jack Nicholson. He died in 2017 at the age of 89. And that concludes our tour. What are some of your favorite memories of the stars we visited today? Share them in the comments below, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more famous grave tours. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one. Where do tombstones go when they die? Right here, in the tombstone graveyard.